The gunshot pierced the evening air as Jane Mitchell clutched her 3-month-old daughter Emma to her chest, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Outside the barn, voices shouted men searching for her, men who had already taken everything else. The wound on her arm stung where the bullet had grazed her, but she dared not cry out. Instead, she climbed higher into the hayloft of the abandoned barn, praying the approaching footsteps belonged to anyone who might help rather than harm. Wyoming Territory, 1876. Jane had never imagined her life would come to this, hiding in a stranger's barn. Miles from the small homestead she'd shared with her husband Thomas, until 3 days ago when the Blackwell gang had raided their home, killing him as he tried to protect his family. She'd escaped with Emma, the clothes on her back, and her wedding ring the only thing of value she had left. "Hush now, sweet girl," Jane whispered against Emma's soft hair as the baby stirred against her chest. The fading light filtered through the cracks in the barn's wooden slats, painting stripes across their hiding spot among the hay bales. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying with it the sound of an approaching horse. Jane held her breath. The Blackwell gang traveled in numbers, and a lone rider might mean something else entirely, though whether better or worse remained to be seen. The horse's hooves slowed as it approached the barn, and Jane pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the loft, one hand cradling Emma's head to muffle any sounds. The barn door creaked open. Jane tightened her grip on the small knife she'd taken from their homestead, her only defense against whoever had entered. Heavy boots crossed the dirt floor below. A man cleared his throat. "Hello." The voice was deep but not threatening. "Anyone in here? I don't mean no harm." Jane remained silent, watching through a small gap between the hay bales as the stranger moved into a shaft of evening light. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dust-covered duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. A gun belt hung around his hips, but his hands were empty, raised slightly as if to show he came in peace. "I know someone's here," he continued. "Saw the tracks leading in, fresh ones. If you're hiding from someone, I might be able to help." Emma chose that moment to let out a small whimper, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet barn. Jane's blood turned to ice as the man's head snapped up toward the loft. "Madam," he called softly. "You up there?" Jane remained frozen, her mind racing through limited options. She could try to run, but with Emma in her arms and no horse of her own, she wouldn't get far. She could fight, but the small knife offered little protection against a gun, or she could hope-pray that this stranger truly meant no harm. Before she could decide, she heard him climbing the ladder to the loft, each creak of the wood sending a fresh wave of fear through her body. She scrambled backward, knife raised defensively in front of her and Emma. The stranger's head appeared first, then his shoulders as he pulled himself into the loft. In the dim light, she could see his face more clearly now, weathered by sun and wind, with several days' growth of beard, but his eyes were kind, crinkled at the corners. "Easy now," he said, noticing the knife. He made no move toward her, keeping his distance. "I'm not going to hurt you or your little one." "Who are you?" Jane demanded, her voice hoarse from disuse and fear. "Isaac Reeves," he answered simply. "I ranch about 10 miles south of here. I was tracking some strays when I saw smoke from a ways off, then came across a burned homestead." He paused, studying her face. "Would that be yours, madam?" Jane's hand trembled, the knife wavering in her grip. "They killed my husband," she whispered, tears threatening. "They burned everything. They're still looking for me." Isaac's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "The Blackwell gang," Jane nodded, surprised. "You know of them. Everyone in these parts knows of them." His eyes moved to Emma, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. "How long have you been hiding here?" "Since yesterday morning. I've been traveling at night, hiding during the day." Isaac crouched down, still keeping his distance. "You're hurt," he said, noticing the dried blood on her sleeve. "It's just a graze," he nodded, seeming to consider something. "Madam, I don't mean to alarm you, but this barn belongs to the Wilsons. They're in Cheyenne for supplies, but they'll be back tomorrow, and this isn't far enough from your homestead. The Blackwells are thorough, they'll search here soon enough." Jane's throat tightened with fear. "I don't have anywhere else to go. You do now, Isaac said firmly. My ranch is well protected with good men working it. You and your baby will be safe there. Why would you help us? Jane asked, suspicion warring with desperate hope. You don't even know us. Isaac's eyes softened. My sister was killed by men like the Blackwells 3 years ago. I couldn't help her then. He extended his hand slowly, palm up. I can help you now. You have my word you and your daughter will be safe with me. Emma cooed softly, reaching a tiny hand toward Isaac. Jane looked down at her daughter, then back at the cowboy's outstretched hand. We need to move quickly, Isaac added. Night's the best cover we've got. The decision crystallized in Jane's mind: stay and certainly be found, or trust this stranger who offered safety. Slowly, she lowered the knife. My name is Jane Mitchell, she said, and this is Emma. Isaac nodded, a small smile touching his lips. Pleased to meet you both, Mrs. Mitchell. Now let's get you somewhere safe. Within minutes, Isaac had helped Jane down from the loft. He fashioned a sling from a clean blanket in his saddlebag, helping Jane secure Emma against her chest for the ride. His horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Rusty, seemed unfazed by the additional passengers. We'll ride double, Isaac explained, checking the cinch on his saddle. It'll be slower, but we need to be careful about leaving tracks. There's a creek about a mile from here. We'll follow it for a spell to throw off anyone following. Jane nodded, grateful for his knowledge. As Isaac helped her mount, she winced when her injured arm pressed against him. We'll tend to that when we get to safety, he promised, swinging up behind her. For now, just hold on to Emma. I won't let you fall. The night closed around them as they rode away from the barn, the vast Wyoming sky stretching above like a blanket of stars. Jane found herself leaning back against Isaac's solid chest, drawing strength from his presence. Emma, miraculously, had fallen asleep in her makeshift sling, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, following the promised creek, doubling back occasionally, and taking paths through rocky ground where hoofprints wouldn't show. Isaac seemed to know the terrain intimately, navigating in the dark with confidence. Not much farther now, he murmured close to her ear as they crested a small rise. In the distance, Jane could make out the faint outline of buildings against the night sky. That's the Lucky R My Ranch. As they drew closer, Jane saw it was larger than she'd imagined: a main house, a bunkhouse, a large barn, and several corrals. A dog began barking as they approached, alerting the inhabitants to their arrival. That's just Patch, Isaac explained. He sounds fierce, but he's gentle as a lamb with women and children. The front door of the main house opened, spilling warm light into the yard. A woman's silhouette appeared. Isaac, that you coming in so late? The voice was elderly but strong. It's me, Martha, Isaac called back as he guided Rusty to a halt. And I've brought guests who need our help. The woman Martha stepped further into the light, revealing a kind face framed by silver hair. She squinted at Jane and Emma, then her expression softened with understanding. Well, bring them in, she urged. Don't keep them sitting out in the night air. Isaac dismounted first, then reached up to help Jane down, carefully supporting her as her legs, stiff from the long ride, threatened to buckle beneath her. Emma stirred in the sling, making small, fussing noises. Martha's my housekeeper, Isaac explained quietly. Been with my family since I was born. You can trust her. Jane nodded, too exhausted to speak. The events of the past few days, the attack, the desperate flight, the fear seemed to crash down on her all at once. If not for Isaac's steadying hand at her elbow, she might have collapsed right there in the yard. Poor dear's dead on her feet, Martha clucked as they approached. And with a little one too. Come inside, honey. You're safe now. The warmth of the house enveloped Jane as they stepped inside. A fire crackled in the stone hearth of a spacious main room furnished simply but comfortably. The smells of home, wood smoke, baking bread, coffee brought unexpected tears to Jane's eyes. Sit her here, Martha directed, indicating a rocking chair near the fire. I'll heat some stew and fetch clean linens for the baby. Isaac helped Jane to the chair, then crouched beside her. Mrs. Mitchell, Jane, you're safe here. No one will find you at the Lucky R. The Blackwells have a wide reach, Jane said, her voice barely above a whisper. They won't stop looking. Let them come, Isaac replied, his voice hardening. They won't set foot on my land and live to tell about it." His expression softened as he looked at Emma, who had awakened and was staring up at him with curious eyes. "You both need rest and care. We can talk more tomorrow." Martha returned with a bowl of stew and a mug of hot tea. "Here now, get this into you. And let's have a look at that arm while you eat." Jane allowed Martha to tend to her wound while she ate, the warm food reviving her strength. The bullet graze was painful but clean, and Martha's gentle hands soon had it washed and bandaged. "The baby will need milk," Jane said worriedly. She'd been nursing Emma but feared her own milk might suffer from the stress and limited food of the past days. "We've got a milk cow," Martha assured her, "and I raised 4 children of my own will manage just fine." She touched Emma's cheek gently. "Such a beautiful child." After Jane had eaten, Martha showed her to a bedroom off the main hall. It was simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a small crib that looked handmade. "This was Isaac's sister's room," Martha explained softly. "Her little one's crib is still here." Jane looked at the crib, then back at Martha. "Isaac mentioned his sister was killed." Martha nodded sadly. "Annabelle and her husband were attacked by outlaws 3 years ago. She was expecting their first child." She sighed heavily. "Nearly destroyed Isaac. He's a good man, one of the best, but he carries that weight." Jane glanced toward the doorway where Isaac had remained, respectfully keeping his distance. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Jane saw not just kindness but a depth of understanding that came only from similar loss. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for both of them. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need for talk of repayment," Isaac replied. "Get some rest. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." After they left, Jane settled Emma in the crib. The baby, clean and fed, drifted quickly to sleep. Jane watched her for a long moment, marveling at her daughter's resilience before crawling into the bed herself. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as her mind replayed the day's events. A cowboy had climbed into her hiding place and promised safety. Against all odds, she had believed him. Now, lying in a stranger's home, Jane felt something she hadn't experienced since the attack hope. The Blackwells were still out there, still a threat, but for tonight at least, she and Emma were safe. With that thought, Jane finally surrendered to sleep. Dawn broke clear and cool over the Lucky R, sunlight streaming through the curtains of Jane's borrowed room. For a moment upon waking, she didn't recognize her surroundings, panic rising in her throat until she spotted Emma sleeping peacefully in the crib. The events of the previous night came rushing back and she exhaled slowly, the panic subsiding. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. "Mrs. Mitchell," Martha's voice called, "I've brought some clean clothes that might fit you and there's breakfast when you're ready." Jane rose and opened the door, accepting the bundle of clothing with gratitude. "Thank you, Martha. I'll be out shortly." The dress Martha had brought was simple but well made, a soft blue calico that was only slightly too large for Jane's frame. After washing with the basin of water provided and changing her clothes, Jane felt almost human again. She lifted Emma, who had awakened with her usual morning gurgles, changed her with the clean cloths Martha had left, and made her way to the kitchen. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with a large cast iron stove along one wall and a sturdy table in the center. Martha stood at the stove, turning bacon in a skillet, while Isaac sat at the table with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be a ledger book. He stood when Jane entered, a gesture of respect that touched her. "Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell. I trust you slept well, better than I have in days," Jane admitted, adjusting Emma in her arms. "Thank you again for your kindness." "Please sit," Isaac gestured to the table. "Martha makes the best breakfast in the territory." Jane sat, and Martha promptly placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before her. "Eat up, dear. You need your strength." As Jane ate one-handed, keeping Emma cradled in her other arm, Isaac cleared his throat. "I sent 2 of my men to ride past your homestead at first light," he said carefully. "They reported back that the Blackwells had been there again, searching the ruins." Jane's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "They're still looking for me." Isaac nodded grimly. "They are. But they're also searching in the wrong direction. My men overheard enough to know they think you headed east toward Laramie." "Why would they want me so badly?" Jane asked, the question that had haunted her for days finally spoken aloud. "We had so little of value." Isaac exchanged a glance with Martha before answering. The Blackwells don't leave witnesses, madam. It's how they've managed to terrorize this territory for so long without being brought to justice. No witnesses means no testimony. The implication was clear. They wanted her dead simply because she could identify them. Jane looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her arm, and felt a surge of protective fury. I won't let them hurt my daughter, nor will we, Isaac assured her firmly. The Lucky R is well protected. I have 8 good men working this ranch, all loyal and all handy with a gun. We keep a watch rotation and no stranger approaches without us knowing. Jane nodded, appreciating his confidence but still fearful. I can't stay here forever, though. I need to figure out what comes next. The future stretched before her, uncertain and frightening. Without Thomas, without their homestead, what options did a young widow with an infant have? You have time to figure that out, Martha said kindly, placing a gentle hand on Jane's shoulder. No one's rushing you anywhere. Martha's right, Isaac agreed. For now, you and Emma are guests of the Lucky R for as long as you need. After breakfast, Isaac excused himself to attend to ranch business, leaving Jane with Martha. The older woman proved to be a wealth of knowledge about caring for Emma, showing Jane how to prepare cow's milk properly for the baby when Jane's own milk wasn't sufficient. You're doing wonderfully with her, Martha commented as they sat on the front porch later that morning, Jane rocking Emma while Martha shelled peas. How old is she? Just over 3 months, Jane replied, smiling down at her daughter. Thomas was so proud when she was born. He said she had my eyes. She does, Martha agreed. Beautiful blue ones. Your husband sounds like he was a good man. Jane nodded, throat tightening. He was. We weren't married long, just 2 years. We came west from Pennsylvania after his parents died. Thomas wanted to build something of our own. And you will again, Martha said confidently. You're young and strong with a good head on your shoulders, I can tell. The day passed peacefully, with Jane helping Martha with household tasks when Emma was sleeping. The routine of domestic work was soothing, giving Jane's hands purpose while her mind processed her grief and fear. Occasionally, she would catch sight of Isaac through the windows as he worked with his men in the corrals or consulted with his foreman. That evening, after supper had been cleared away, Isaac invited Jane to sit on the porch where the cool evening breeze offered relief from the day's heat. Emma was already asleep inside, with Martha keeping an ear out for her. You have a beautiful ranch, Jane commented, looking out over the property as the setting sun bathed everything in golden light. Cattle grazed in the distance, and several horses milled about in the nearest corral. Thank you, Isaac replied, settling into the chair beside hers. It was my father's before me. He came out here in '45 before Wyoming was even a territory, built it up from nothing. He'd be proud of what you've made of it. Isaac glanced at her, a small smile playing at his lips. I hope so. It's good land, fertile valley with a year-round creek, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms by those foothills. He nodded toward the distant mountains. I was lucky to inherit it. And your sister would have shared in it, Jane asked carefully, remembering what Martha had told her. Isaac's expression sobered. Yes, Annabelle and her husband William had a small homestead not far from here. After they were killed, I bought the land from William's family back east, couldn't bear to see strangers living there. I'm sorry, Jane said softly. I know how it feels to lose someone so suddenly. Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. Tell me about your husband, if you don't mind. Martha mentioned you came from Pennsylvania. Jane spent the next hour telling Isaac about Thomas, how they'd met at a church social, his dreams of going west, their journey by train and then wagon to Wyoming, and the small homestead they'd built together. Isaac listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. He sounds like a fine man, Isaac said when she finished, the kind who would have made a good neighbor. He would have, Jane agreed, wiping away a stray tear. What about you? Have you never married? A shadow crossed Isaac's face. Almost once. Her name was Rebecca. Her father had the spread next to ours. We were going to marry when she turned 18, but she took sick with fever that winter, didn't make it to spring. I'm sorry, Jane said, meaning it. It seemed loss was a common thread between them. Isaac shrugged, though Jane could see it still pained him. It was a long time ago, almost 10 years now. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, the stars appearing one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. Jane found herself studying Isaac's profile, the strong jaw covered with several days' growth of beard, the straight nose, the lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. He was handsome in a rugged way, and there was something undeniably comforting about his presence. "We should head in," Isaac said eventually, standing and offering his hand to help her up. Days start early on a ranch. Jane accepted his hand, noticing the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. "Thank you for listening. It helps to talk about him." "Anytime, Mrs. Mitchell." "Jane," she corrected him. "Please call me Jane." Isaac's smile was warm in the gathering darkness. "Jane it is then. Good night." Over the next few days, Jane settled into life at the Lucky R. The routine of ranch life was soothing, predictable in a way that helped ease her anxiety. Each morning, Isaac rode out with his men to tend the cattle or mend fences or handle whatever other tasks needed doing. Jane helped Martha with household chores, caring for Emma, and even learning to bake bread in the temperamental oven that Martha swore had a mind of its own. In the evenings, Jane and Isaac would often sit on the porch after supper, talking until the stars came out. Jane learned that Isaac had fought briefly in the Civil War, returning home when his father fell ill. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, of breeding stronger cattle that could better withstand Wyoming's harsh winters. In turn, Jane told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her schoolteacher mother who had taught her to read and write and cipher, and her hopes for Emma's future. A week after their arrival at the Lucky R, Isaac's foreman, a grizzled man named Jim Harker, brought news that made Jane's blood run cold. Blackwells were asking questions in town, Jim reported over supper, offering money for information about a young woman with a baby. He glanced apologetically at Jane. "They're not giving up the search, it seems." "Did anyone talk?" Isaac asked sharply. Jim shook his head. "Not that I could tell. Folks in these parts have no love for the Blackwells, but money talks and not everyone's got principles that can't be bought." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Double the watch tonight, and Jim send word to Sheriff Taylor in Cheyenne. It's time the law knew exactly what the Blackwells have been up to." After Jim had gone, Jane found her hands trembling as she cleared the supper dishes. "They're getting closer," she whispered. Isaac moved to her side, gently taking the plates from her shaking hands. "Jane, look at me." When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "I meant what I said the first night. You and Emma are safe here. I won't let anything happen to either of you." The conviction in his voice steadied her. "I believe you." That night, as Jane prepared for bed, she heard the ranch hands taking up positions around the property. The knowledge that armed men were guarding against intruders should have been reassuring, but instead, it underscored the danger she and Emma were in and, by extension, the danger she had brought to Isaac and his household. Sleep eluded her. After tossing and turning for hours, Jane rose and went to the window, gazing out at the moonlit ranch yard. A figure stood near the corral. Isaac, she realized, keeping watch himself despite having men to do it for him. The sight of him, steady and vigilant, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Morning came with no incidents, but the knowledge that the Blackwells were actively searching for her cast a shadow over the day. Jane found herself jumping at small noises, constantly checking on Emma and watching the horizon for approaching riders. Late that afternoon, as Jane was helping Martha hang laundry in the yard, a cloud of dust on the distant road announced approaching visitors. Her heart leapt into her throat. "Martha," she said urgently, pointing. Martha squinted into the distance, then nodded calmly. "I see them." "Get inside with the baby, dear. I'll fetch Isaac." Jane hurried into the house, gathered Emma from her crib, and moved to the window where she could watch the road. Soon, Isaac and 3 of his men had positioned themselves in the yard, rifles ready but not yet raised. As the riders drew closer, Jane could make out 2 men, one on a bay horse and another on a dappled gray. They weren't riding hard, which suggested they weren't in pursuit of anyone. Still, Jane held her breath until she heard Isaac's voice call out in greeting. "Afternoon, Sheriff." "What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" Relief washed over Jane, not the Blackwells then, but the law. She moved to the door, Emma in her arms, listening. "Afternoon, Isaac," a deep voice replied. "Got your message about the Blackwells. Thought I'd ride out and get the details in person." "Appreciate it, Sheriff Taylor. This is serious business." "So your man indicated. Said something about a witness to their latest atrocity." Jane stepped onto the porch then, drawing the attention of both men. The sheriff, a tall man with a silver mustache and weathered skin, looked at her with sharp, assessing eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell," Isaac said, coming to stand beside her. "This is Sheriff Richard Taylor from Cheyenne. Sheriff, this is Mrs. Jane Mitchell and her daughter Emma." "Madam," the sheriff tipped his hat respectfully, "I understand you've had a terrible ordeal." Jane nodded. "My husband and I had a homestead about 20 miles east of here. The Blackwell gang attacked us 8 days ago." Her voice caught. "They killed my husband when he tried to defend us. I escaped with Emma, but they burned everything." The sheriff's expression hardened. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Mitchell. Would you be willing to give me a full statement of what happened? Your testimony could help me finally bring the Blackwells to justice." "Of course," Jane agreed. "Anything that would help stop them from doing this to anyone else." Inside, seated at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee provided by Martha, Jane recounted the attack in detail, how 5 men had ridden up to their homestead just before sunset, how Thomas had sensed trouble and told her to hide with Emma, how she had witnessed her husband's murder from their root cellar, and how she had fled when they began searching for her. "I can identify at least 3 of them," she concluded. "Frank Blackwell himself, his brother Edward, and a man they called Stokes." Sheriff Taylor nodded, making notes in a small book. "This is exactly what I needed, Mrs. Mitchell. The Blackwells have terrorized this territory for years, but witnesses rarely survive to testify." He looked up at her. "You're a brave woman." "Not brave," Jane corrected softly. "Just determined to protect my daughter." "The bravest kind of courage there is," Isaac commented from where he stood by the door. The sheriff closed his notebook and tucked it into his vest pocket. "I'll be straight with you folks. I'm gathering a posse to go after the Blackwells, but it'll take time. We need to be certain we get all of them, not just a few. In the meantime, Mrs. Mitchell, you should stay somewhere safe." "She's staying right here," Isaac said firmly. "The Lucky R is as safe as anywhere in the territory." Sheriff Taylor nodded. "I'd agree with that. I'll send word when we're ready to move against the gang. Until then, keep your men alert, Isaac." "Always do, Sheriff." After the sheriff had gone, Jane found herself trembling with delayed reaction. The act of recounting the attack had brought it all back with vivid clarity. Thomas's shout as the first shot was fired, the smell of gunpowder, the heat of the flames as their home burned, Isaac noticed. Without a word, he crossed to a cabinet, took out a bottle of whiskey and poured a small amount into a glass. "Medicinal," he said, offering it to her. "Just a sip." Jane took the glass and sipped the fiery liquid, coughing slightly as it burned its way down her throat. But it did steady her nerves. "Thank you. You did well," Isaac said, sitting across from her. "That testimony will help bring them to justice. If the sheriff catches them," Jane pointed out, "he will. Richard Taylor is a good lawman, thorough and careful. He won't move until he's sure he can get them all, but when he does move, he won't fail." Jane wanted to believe him. She looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the danger that still threatened them. "I keep thinking about what comes after," she admitted. "If the Blackwells are caught, if it's safe. What then? Our homestead is gone. Thomas is gone. I have no family out here, no money to start over." Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering. "There are options," he said finally. "Many towns would welcome a young widow willing to work. Some have schools that need teachers if you have education." "I do," Jane confirmed. "My mother was a teacher. I taught in our village school in Pennsylvania for 2 years before marrying Thomas." "There you are then. Cheyenne or Laramie would be lucky to have you." It was a practical solution, and Jane knew she should be grateful for it. Yet the thought of leaving the Lucky R, of taking Emma to some strange town to start over alone, filled her with an unexpected sadness. "Yes," she said, forcing a smile. "That could work." Isaac seemed about to say more, but was interrupted by Jim Harker calling from outside. With an apologetic nod to Jane, he rose and went to see what his foreman needed. That evening, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it driving rain and occasional flashes of lightning. Jane sat in the parlor, sewing a torn shirt of Isaac's that Martha had asked her to mend. The older woman had retired early with a headache, leaving Jane alone when Isaac came in from checking the barn. "Storm's getting worse," he commented, shaking water from his hat and coat. "Cattle are restless, but the men have them contained in the north pasture where there's some shelter." Jane set aside her sewing. "Would you like some coffee? The pot's still hot on the stove." "I would, thank you." She fetched him a cup, noting how the rain had plastered his dark hair to his forehead and dampened his shirt. When she handed him the coffee, their fingers brushed, and Jane felt a small jolt of awareness that surprised her. She stepped back quickly, embarrassed by her reaction. Isaac didn't seem to notice, taking a grateful sip of the hot coffee. "How's Emma?" Sleeping soundly. "She doesn't seem bothered by the thunder." "Good, some little ones are frightened by storms." He moved to stand by the fireplace, the dancing flames highlighting the strong planes of his face. "Jim tells me there's a schoolhouse being built in Buffalo Creek, about 15 miles from here. They'll be needing a teacher come fall." Jane looked up in surprise. "Buffalo Creek, I don't think I've heard of it. Small settlement but growing, mostly ranchers and a few merchants, decent folks." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It would be close enough that we could keep an eye on you and Emma, make sure you're safe." The implication warmed Jane more than it should have. "That's very kind of you to think of, not kindness," Isaac said quietly. "I've grown. Accustomed to having you and Emma here, the thought of you moving all the way to Cheyenne or Laramie doesn't sit well." Jane's heart quickened at his admission. Over the past week, she too had grown accustomed to Isaac's presence, his quiet strength, his gentle way with Emma, the conversations that stretched late into the evening. But she had attributed her feelings to gratitude and the natural bond that forms between people who have shared hardship. "I've grown accustomed to being here as well," she admitted softly. Isaac set down his coffee cup and took a step toward her, then hesitated. "Jane, I know it's too soon. Your husband would want Emma and me to be safe and cared for," Jane finished for him. "Thomas was a good man who loved us. He wouldn't want us to be alone." Isaac nodded slowly. "No, he wouldn't, but I don't want to press you or rush you. When this business with the Blackwells is settled, you'll have choices to make. I just want you to know that one of those choices could be staying close by." Before Jane could respond, a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the house interrupted them. Emma's startled cry came from the bedroom, and Jane hurried to check on her. When she returned with a calmed Emma, Isaac was at the window, peering out into the storm-darkened night. "Something's not right," he said, his voice tense. "Patch is barking, but I can't see what's got him riled." Jane clutched Emma closer. "The Blackwells. Maybe stay inside, away from the windows." Isaac moved to the gun cabinet and took out a Winchester rifle. "I'm going to check with the men on watch." Fear gripped Jane as Isaac stepped onto the porch. Through the window, she could see him speaking with one of his ranch hands who had appeared from the darkness. Their expressions were grim. A moment later, Isaac returned, his face set in hard lines. Jim spotted riders approaching from the east, 5 or 6 of them. "In this weather at this hour, it's not likely to be friendly visitors." Jane's legs threatened to give way. "What do? We get you and Emma somewhere safe, then we defend the ranch." Isaac led her quickly to the kitchen, where he opened a trapdoor in the floor that Jane hadn't noticed before. "Root cellar," he explained. "Deep and solid. Martha's already down there." Jane peered into the darkness below, seeing the faint glow of a lantern where Martha waited. The memory of hiding in the root cellar at her own homestead, listening to Thomas die, threatened to overwhelm her. Isaac seemed to read her thoughts. "I know it's difficult," he said gently, "but I need to know you're safe so I can focus on dealing with them." Jane nodded, swallowing her fear. "Be careful, Isaac, please." "I will." His hand touched her cheek briefly, a fleeting caress that conveyed more than words could. "Go now." Jane descended the ladder into the root cellar, Emma held securely against her chest. Martha was there as promised, a shotgun across her lap and determination in her eyes. "Come sit by me, dear," the older woman said, patting the bench beside her. "This old cellar has weathered worse than a gang of no-good outlaws." Above them, Jane could hear the muffled sounds of men moving, preparing. Then the trapdoor closed, and all they could hear was the distant rumble of thunder and their own breathing. "Isaac will protect us," Martha said confidently. "He's a good man in a fight, steady and smart." "I know," Jane whispered, though fear still coursed through her. She had already lost one good man to the Blackwells. The thought of losing Isaac was more painful than she wanted to examine, minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Emma, sensing her mother's tension, began to fuss. Jane rocked her gently, humming a lullaby that her own mother had sung to her. The familiar melody calmed both of them. Then came the sounds they had been dreading, shouts, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Jane flinched at each shot, imagining Isaac out there, exposed to danger because of her. "Steady now," Martha murmured. "Our boys know what they're doing." The gunfire continued, punctuated by shouted commands that were too muffled to make out clearly. Then, gradually, it tapered off until silence fell once more. Jane and Martha exchanged anxious glances. Had the Blackwells been driven off? Or had Isaac and his men been overcome? The wait for an answer was excruciating. Jane found herself praying for Isaac, for his men, for Emma's future, for her own strength to face whatever came next. Finally, the trapdoor creaked open. Jane held her breath until Isaac's voice called down, "It's all clear. You can come up now." Relief flooded through her. Martha squeezed her hand once before rising to climb the ladder. Jane followed, balancing Emma carefully as she ascended. Isaac stood in the kitchen, his face smudged with gunpowder and a small cut bleeding on his forehead, but otherwise unharmed. Jane nearly sagged with relief at the sight of him. "The Blackwells?" she asked. "Two dead, the rest fled," Isaac reported grimly. "Frank and Edward weren't among them, must have sent some of their men to do the searching while they stayed clear." "Any of our people hurt?" Martha asked anxiously. "Pete took a bullet in the shoulder, but Doc Thompson's tending to him. He'll be fine." Isaac's eyes hadn't left Jane's face. "You and Emma all right?" Jane nodded. "Yes, just shaken. I've sent Jim to fetch Sheriff Taylor. This attack changes things. We have proof now that the Blackwells are actively hunting you, not just making inquiries." "They won't stop, will they?" Jane asked, though she already knew the answer. "Not until they're caught or killed," Isaac confirmed. "But neither will we stop protecting you." Martha, sensing the tension between them, quietly excused herself to check on the wounded ranch hand, leaving Jane and Isaac alone in the kitchen. "I was afraid for you," Jane admitted once Martha had gone. "When I heard the shooting, I know," Isaac said softly. "I was afraid too, not for myself, but for you and Emma. If anything happened to you," he broke off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Jane, I know it hasn't been long, but I need to say this. When I found you in that loft, something changed for me. Having you and Emma here, it's brought life back to this house to me." Jane's heart pounded in her chest. "Isaac, let me finish, please. I'm not asking for anything. I know you're grieving and you have Emma to think about, but when this is over, when you're truly safe, I want you to know that there's a place for you here. Not just as someone to protect, but as," he hesitated, then forged ahead, "as someone I care deeply about." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Jane looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around her, then back at Isaac. In his eyes, she saw not just protection and kindness, but something deeper, a connection that had formed between them through shared dangers and quiet evenings, through grief and cautious hope. "I care about you too," she said softly. "More than I should, perhaps, given how little time has passed. But I do." Isaac took a step toward her, then stopped as the sound of horses approaching reached them. "That'll be Jim with the sheriff," he said, regret clear in his voice at the interruption. "We should go meet them." Sheriff Taylor arrived with 4 deputies, grim-faced and determined. He surveyed the scene, the 2 dead outlaws laid out in the barn, the bullet holes in the main house, the wounded ranch hand being tended by the local doctor who had arrived with Jim. "This settles it," he announced after hearing Isaac's account of the attack. "We move against the Blackwells tomorrow. I've got men positioned near their known hideout already, watching. With these 2 dead, they're down to 7 men, maybe 8. He turned to Jane. "Mrs. Mitchell, your testimony will be crucial when we bring them in." "I'll testify," Jane assured him. "Whatever it takes to end this." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "In the meantime, I'm leaving 2 of my deputies here for added protection. just in case they try again before we can round them up." After the sheriff had given his instructions and departed with the bodies of the dead outlaws, the ranch slowly settled back into an uneasy calm. The men on watch were doubled, with Sheriff Taylor's deputies taking positions at the front and rear of the property. Martha insisted on checking Isaac's cut, despite his protests that it was nothing. Jane put Emma down in her crib, then returned to the kitchen where Isaac sat at the table, allowing Martha to clean the wound on his forehead. "It needs stitches," Martha declared. "No, it doesn't," Isaac argued. "It's barely a scratch. Head wounds bleed something fierce," Martha countered. "At least let me put a proper bandage on it." Isaac submitted with poor grace to Martha's ministrations, wincing as she applied a stinging antiseptic. Jane watched from the doorway, a small smile tugging at her lips despite the seriousness of the night's events. There was something endearing about seeing the strong, capable rancher being fussed over like a child. "There," Martha said finally, securing a bandage. "Now try not to get shot at for at least a few days, would you? My nerves can't take it." "Yes, madam," Isaac replied with a wry smile. He caught Jane's eye and his smile softened. "What are you grinning at over there, Mrs. Mitchell?" "Just thinking that Martha might have missed her calling as an army nurse," Jane replied lightly. "She has the right temperament for it." "HMPH," Martha snorted but looked pleased at the compliment. "If you two don't mind, I'm going back to bed. Some of us need our beauty sleep." After she had gone, Isaac rose and moved to the stove, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "Join me," he asked, offering one to Jane. She accepted, settling into a chair at the table. "Do you think the sheriff will succeed tomorrow?" Isaac considered the question as he sat across from her. "If anyone can bring in the Blackwells, it's Richard Taylor. He's been after them for years. This is the closest he's ever come." "Because of me," Jane said quietly. "Because I survived to identify them." "Yes, your courage may finally bring them to justice." Jane shook her head. "It wasn't courage. I was terrified. I still am." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Isaac said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "It's acting despite it. You saved Emma, you survived, you're willing to testify. That's courage, Jane." His touch was warm and reassuring. Jane turned her hands so that their palms met, fingers intertwining. The simple contact sent a current of awareness through her, a reminder of their interrupted conversation earlier. "Isaac, about what you said before, I meant it," he said simply. "Every word. But I also meant that I'm not asking for anything right now. You need time, and there are more pressing matters at hand." Jane nodded, grateful for his understanding. "When this is over," she promised, "when Emma and I are truly safe, we'll talk about the future." Isaac squeezed her hand gently. "That's all I ask." They stayed like that for a long time, hands joined across the table, drawing strength from each other as the night deepened around them, and the storm gradually moved off to the east. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Jane awakened to the sound of activity in the ranch yard, men preparing for the day, horses being saddled, orders being called out. She dressed quickly and went to the window, seeing Isaac in conversation with Sheriff Taylor, who must have returned in the early hours. By the time Jane had dressed Emma and made her way to the kitchen, Martha was already there, preparing breakfast for what seemed like an army. "Sheriff brought more men," Martha explained as she flipped pancakes on the griddle. "They're heading out after the Blackwells as soon as they eat." Jane's stomach tightened with anxiety. "Is Isaac going with them?" Martha nodded grimly. "Wild horses couldn't keep him away. He's got as much reason to want the Blackwells brought to justice as anyone." "Because of me," Jane thought. "Because they threatened Emma and me and attacked his home." The kitchen door opened and Isaac entered, followed by Sheriff Taylor. Both men looked serious but determined. "Morning, Jane," Isaac greeted her. "Sheriff Taylor has news." "We've located the Blackwell gang's hideout," the sheriff explained without preamble. "A line shack about 15 miles from here in the foothills. My men have been watching it since yesterday. All the remaining members appear to be there, including Frank and Edward Blackwell." "You're going after them today," Jane said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, madam, we leave within the hour." The sheriff looked at her directly. "I won't lie to you, it could get ugly. These men won't surrender easily." "I understand." Jane glanced at Isaac, noting the determined set of his jaw. You're going too, I am, Isaac confirmed. Jim will stay behind with 4 men to protect the ranch, plus the deputy sheriff assigned here. Jane wanted to object, to beg Isaac to stay, but she knew it would be futile. This was his fight too now had been since the moment he found her in the loft and promised safety. Be careful, she said instead, the words inadequate for the fear she felt. Isaac's expression softened. I will. Breakfast was a tense affair, with the posse members eating quickly before filing out to mount up. Jane stood on the porch with Emma in her arms, watching as nearly 20 men gathered in the yard, checking weapons and adjusting saddles. Isaac approached her before mounting his horse. He looked formidable in his duster, rifle secured in its scabbard, pistol at his hip. We should be back by nightfall, he told her. One way or another, this ends today. Jane nodded, trying to appear braver than she felt. I'll be praying for all of you. Isaac glanced at Emma, then back at Jane. His eyes held a promise. I have something to come back for, remember that. Before Jane could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her cheek, a quick, gentle touch that was gone almost before she registered it. Then he was striding toward his horse, mounting up with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. Sheriff Taylor gave the order, and the posse rode out in a cloud of dust. Jane watched until they disappeared from sight, Isaac's kiss still warm on her cheek, his words echoing in her mind, I have something to come back for. The day stretched endlessly. Jane tried to keep busy helping Martha with chores, tending to Emma, even assisting in preparing bandages in case they were needed when the men returned. But her thoughts remained with the posse, imagining the confrontation to come. You're sweet on him, aren't you? Martha asked as they folded sheets in the afternoon. The question was direct but not unkind. Jane felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's complicated, Martha. The older woman nodded understandingly. Loss always is. But I've known Isaac Reeves since he was born, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Rebecca. God rest her soul. It hasn't even been 2 weeks since Thomas died, Jane said softly. Sometimes I feel disloyal for caring about Isaac. The heart doesn't keep a calendar, dear, Martha replied. And from what you've told me about your Thomas, he sounds like a man who would want you to find happiness again, especially with someone who would protect you and Emma so fiercely. Jane considered Martha's words. Thomas had been loving and kind. He would have wanted her to be safe, to be cared for. Perhaps you're right. I usually am, Martha said with a small smile. Now let's finish these sheets. Keeping busy is the best cure for worry. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Jane found herself increasingly unable to concentrate on tasks. She took to pacing on the porch, scanning the eastern trail for any sign of returning riders. Emma, picking up on her mother's anxiety, became fussy and difficult to soothe. Why don't I take her for a bit? Martha offered. You're wearing a path in the porch boards with all that pacing. Jane handed Emma over gratefully, knowing the baby would be content with Martha, who had a knack for calming her. Alone on the porch, Jane allowed her fears full rein. What if the Blackwells had been waiting in ambush? What if Isaac was injured? What if he didn't return at all? The thought of losing him, of never again seeing his kind eyes or hearing his deep voice or feeling the security of his presence, was almost physically painful. In the short time she had known him, Isaac Reeves had become essential to her in a way she hadn't thought possible. The sun had nearly set when Jim Harker, who had been watching from the windmill tower, called out, "Riders coming. Looks like the sheriff's posse." Jane's heart leapt. She strained her eyes, trying to make out individual figures in the approaching group. They were moving slowly. Some riders doubled up on horses, a sign that there were wounded among them. As they drew closer, Jane searched desperately for Isaac's tall form. The fading light made it difficult to distinguish one rider from another at this distance. "Can you see Isaac?" she called up to Jim. The foreman was silent for a long moment, studying the approaching riders through his spyglass. "Can't rightly tell, Mrs. Mitchell. They're still too far off." The wait was excruciating. Jane clutched the porch railing, willing the riders to move faster, praying that Isaac was among them. Finally, the posse reached the ranch yard. Sheriff Taylor led the group, his face grim but satisfied. Behind him came his deputies, escorting 6 men with their hands bound the Blackwell gang, captured at last. Among them, Jane recognized Frank Blackwell, his face twisted in a scowl of hatred when he spotted her on the porch. But where was Isaac? Jane scanned the remaining riders frantically, fear clutching at her heart. Then, at the rear of the group, she saw him, Isaac, helping support another man who appeared to be wounded. Relief washed over her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. As if sensing her gaze, Isaac looked up and their eyes met across the yard. Even in the gathering dusk, Jane could see his face break into a tired smile. He said something to the man next to him, who nodded and took over supporting the wounded rider, freeing Isaac to make his way toward the house. Jane didn't wait. She hurried down the porch steps and across the yard, heedless of propriety or watching eyes. Isaac dismounted, handing his reins to a ranch hand, and opened his arms just as Jane reached him. She went into his embrace without hesitation, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sweat and gunpowder. His arms tightened around her, strong and secure. "You're safe," she whispered. "Thank God you're safe." "I told you I had something to come back for," Isaac murmured against her hair. Jane drew back enough to look at his face. There was a fresh bruise on his cheekbone, and he held himself carefully, suggesting other injuries he was trying to hide. But he was alive, whole, standing before her. "The Blackwells," she asked. "Captured all of them," Isaac confirmed. "2 more dead, but the rest will stand trial, including Frank and Edward. It's over, Jane. They can't hurt you or Emma anymore." The full import of his words washed over her. It was over. The nightmare that had begun with the attack on her homestead had finally ended. Emma would be safe. They both would. "Mrs. Mitchell," Sheriff Taylor approached, tipping his hat respectfully. "Thought you'd want to know we've got them dead to rights. Between your testimony and what we found at their hideout, including stolen goods from 6 homesteads, they'll hang for sure. You won't have to live in fear anymore." "Thank you, Sheriff," Jane said sincerely, "for everything. Just doing my job, madam." He glanced between her and Isaac, a knowing look in his eyes. Reeves here was something to see today. Tracked the Blackwells to a second hideout when they tried to slip away from the first. Saved my life when Frank got the drop on me. Jane looked up at Isaac, who shrugged modestly. "Any of your men would have done the same, Richard." "Maybe so," the sheriff allowed, "but it was you who did it." He touched the brim of his hat again. "We'll be moving on to Cheyenne with the prisoners first thing tomorrow. I'll need you both to come to town next week to give your formal statements for the trial." "We'll be there," Isaac promised. After the sheriff moved off to organize the temporary imprisonment of the Blackwells in the ranch's storage shed, Jane turned back to Isaac. "You're hurt," she said, noting how he winced when he shifted his weight. "Took a fall when my horse was shot out from under me," Isaac admitted. "Nothing serious. Rusty got the worst of it, poor fellow." Jane's eyes widened in concern. "Your horse is fine," Isaac assured her quickly. "The bullet just grazed his flank. He'll heal." He reached up to touch her face gently. "We all will." Martha appeared at the porch, Emma in her arms. "Bring him inside, Jane," she called. "That man needs cleaning up and feeding before he falls over." Isaac chuckled. "Martha hasn't changed since I was 10, still treating me like I need looking after." "You do," Jane said softly, taking his arm. "Come inside. Let me help you for a change." In the kitchen, Jane insisted on tending to Isaac's injuries herself. He had indeed taken a bad fall. His ribs were bruised, though thankfully not broken, and he had a long scrape down his back where he had hit the ground. "You were lucky," Jane said as she applied salve to the scrape. Her fingers trembled slightly at the intimacy of touching his bare skin. "Blessed," Isaac corrected, wincing as the salve stung. "Not just today, but since the moment I found you in that loft." Jane's hands stilled on his back. "Isaac." He turned to face her, catching her hands in his. "I know it's soon, Jane. I know you're still grieving Thomas, and he was your husband, Emma's father, but I need you to know how I feel." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when you were so fierce protecting Emma, so brave despite everything you'd been through." Jane's heart pounded in her chest. She thought of Thomas, his kind smile, his dreams for their future, the life they had started to build together. His loss would always be a part of her, But here was Isaac, offering a new beginning, a chance at happiness she hadn't dared hope for after the tragedy. "I love you too," she whispered, the admission both frightening and freeing. "I didn't expect it, didn't want it so soon after losing Thomas." But it happened anyway. Isaac's eyes filled with tender understanding. "We don't have to rush anything, I just wanted you to know." "I do know," Jane said, "and now you know too." Their first kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a passion. Isaac's lips were warm against hers, his touch reverent. When they parted, Jane rested her forehead against his, content in the moment of connection. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Whatever you want," Isaac replied. "The teaching position in Buffalo Creek is still an option if you want independence." Or he hesitated, then continued, "You and Emma could stay here, not as guests but as family." "Are you proposing, Mr. Reeves?" Jane asked, a small smile playing at her lips despite the seriousness of the moment. "Inelegantly, but yes," Isaac admitted. "I love you, Jane. I love Emma too. I want to be a father to her, a husband to you, but only if and when you're ready." Jane thought of the future stretching before them, raising Emma together, perhaps adding more children to their family, building a life on the land Isaac so clearly loved. It wouldn't be the future she had planned with Thomas, but it could be beautiful in its own way. "I think," she said slowly, "that Emma and I would like to stay at the Lucky R, and when enough time has passed to honor Thomas's memory properly, I would be honored to become your wife." Joy transformed Isaac's face. "Truly, truly," Jane confirmed. "You climbed into that loft and promised we'd be safe. You've kept that promise every day since. Now I'm making a promise too, to build a future with you, to love you, to be the family you deserve." Isaac gathered her into his arms, mindful of his injuries, and held her close. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that decision," he vowed. 1 week later, Jane and Isaac traveled to Cheyenne to give their testimony against the Blackwell gang. The trial was swift, and the verdict unanimous, guilty on all counts. Frank Blackwell and his brother Edward were sentenced to hang, while their remaining men received long prison sentences. As they left the courthouse, Jane felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "It's really over," she said, holding Emma close. "It is," Isaac agreed. "Your courage made it possible." "Our courage," Jane corrected him. "I couldn't have done it without you." Isaac smiled, offering his arm as they walked toward the hotel where they would stay before returning to the Lucky R the next day. "Have you given any thought to when you might be ready to make things official between us?" Jane considered the question seriously. "I think by Christmas," she said finally. "That would be 6 months since Thomas passed. It feels right to me." "Christmas it is then," Isaac agreed. "I can't think of a better gift than making you and Emma my family in the eyes of the law, as you already are in my heart." December arrived with a blanket of snow across the Wyoming landscape. The Lucky R was transformed into a winter wonderland, the buildings and fences outlined in white, smoke curling from chimneys into the clear blue sky. Inside the main house, preparations for both Christmas and a wedding were underway. Martha had enlisted the help of neighboring ranch wives to decorate with pine boughs and red ribbons. The smell of baking filled the kitchen daily as she prepared for the celebration to come. Jane stood by the window of what was now her and Emma's permanent bedroom, watching Isaac in the yard below as he helped his men bring in a large pine tree for the parlor. At 9 months old, Emma was now crawling everywhere, babbling constantly, and had Isaac wrapped firmly around her tiny finger. These past months had been a time of healing and growth. Jane still thought of Thomas daily, keeping his memory alive for Emma through stories and the few mementos she had salvaged. But her heart had opened fully to Isaac as well, their love deepening through shared days and nights, through the rhythms of ranch life and the quiet moments of connection. There had been challenges, nightmares that left Jane gasping and tearful, days when grief washed over her unexpectedly, moments when the magnitude of the changes in her life seemed overwhelming. Through it all, Isaac had been patient and understanding, never rushing her, always steady in his love. A knock at the door drew Jane from her thoughts. Martha entered, carrying a large box. "It's arrived," the older woman announced triumphantly. "From Denver, just as you ordered." Jane opened the box to reveal a wedding dress of ivory silk, simple but elegant with its high collar and fitted bodice. "It's perfect," she breathed, running her fingers over the fine fabric. "You'll be the most beautiful bride the lucky R has ever seen," Martha declared, her eyes suspiciously damp. "Isaac won't know what hit him." "Do you think he'll like it?" Jane asked, suddenly anxious. Martha laughed. "Child, that man would think you looked beautiful in a potato sack. But yes, he'll like it very much." On Christmas Eve, the ranch house was filled with warmth, light, and the murmur of conversation as friends and neighbors gathered for the wedding. The parlor had been transformed, with the pine tree glowing with candles in one corner and an improvised altar before the fireplace where Reverend Johnson from Buffalo Creek waited. In the bedroom, Jane stood before the mirror as Martha made final adjustments to her hair, which was arranged in soft curls with sprigs of holly tucked into the pins. "There," Martha said, stepping back to admire her work. "Absolutely lovely." Jane hardly recognized herself in the mirror. The ivory dress complemented her fair skin and brought out the blue of her eyes. Around her neck hung a simple gold locket, a gift from Isaac that morning, containing a tiny portrait of Emma on one side and a lock of her baby hair on the other. "I wish my parents could be here," Jane said softly. "And Thomas's too. They never even got to meet Emma." "They're here in spirit," Martha assured her, squeezing her hand, "and they'd be proud of the woman you've become, the mother you are to Emma." A gentle knock at the door announced Jim Harker, who had agreed to walk Jane down the aisle in the absence of her father. "Ready, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked, looking uncomfortable but proud in his Sunday best. Jane took a deep breath. "Ready, Mr. Harker." The small procession moved from the bedroom to the parlor, where the assembled guests, ranch hands, neighbors, and friends stood as Jane entered on Jim's arm. But Jane had eyes only for Isaac, who waited by the fireplace, looking so handsome in his dark suit that her heart skipped a beat. His expression as he saw her was everything she could have hoped for: wonder, joy, and love so clear that it brought tears to her eyes. Martha stood nearby, holding Emma, who was dressed in a tiny white dress with a red sash. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Johnson began as Jane reached Isaac's side. "We are gathered here on this Christmas Eve to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to love, honor, and protect, to build a family together, to face whatever challenges life might bring as partners and friends. When Isaac slipped the gold band onto Jane's finger, his hands were steady, but his voice trembled slightly with emotion. "With this ring I thee wed." And when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac's kiss was a seal on the promises they had made, tender but certain, the foundation of the life they would build together. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing, food and laughter. As midnight approached, Isaac found Jane by the Christmas tree where she stood watching their guests with Emma sleeping against her shoulder. "Mrs. Reeves," he said, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. "May I have this dance?" Jane smiled, her heart full. "You may, Mr. Reeves." "But what about Emma? I believe Grandma Martha would be delighted to hold her for a spell," Isaac said, nodding toward the older woman who was already approaching with outstretched arms. "Grandma Martha," Jane repeated with a smile, surrendering her sleeping daughter. "I like the sound of that." As Isaac led her to the center of the room where other couples were dancing to a slow fiddle tune, Jane reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From terror to safety, from grief to joy, from a desperate hiding place in a barn loft to a home filled with love. "What are you thinking about, wife?" Isaac asked as they swayed together, his hand warm at the small of her back. "About the night we met," Jane replied honestly. "How afraid I was, how you promised Emma and I would be safe." "The best promise I ever made," Isaac said softly. "And the easiest to keep." Jane laid her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Isaac Reeves. And I love you, Jane Reeves," he replied, tightening his arms around her. "Merry Christmas." Outside, snow began to fall, adding another layer of white to the Wyoming landscape. But inside the ranch house, all was warmth and light and love, a family forged through adversity, strengthened by courage and blessed with a future as vast and promising as the western sky. 5 years later, the schoolhouse in Buffalo Creek rang with children's voices as Jane dismissed her class for the day. At the front of the room, 6-year-old Emma carefully arranged her books in her desk, a serious expression on her face that reminded Jane so much of Thomas it made her heart ache sweetly. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" Jane asked, gathering her own teaching materials. Emma nodded, her dark braids bouncing. "Is Papa meeting us today?" "He is," Jane confirmed, "and he's bringing a surprise." Emma's blue eyes widened with excitement. "What kind of surprise? If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, would it?" Jane teased, helping her daughter into her coat. Outside, the April sunshine warmed the air, bringing the promise of spring after a long Wyoming winter. Jane and Emma walked hand in hand down the single street of Buffalo Creek, which had grown considerably in the 5 years since Jane had first heard of it. There was now a proper general store, a small hotel, and even a telegraph office in addition to the schoolhouse where Jane taught 3 days a week. As promised, Isaac waited for them at the edge of town, sitting tall on his favorite gelding and leading 2 other horses, Jane's mare and Emma's pony. But it was the bundle in his arms that drew Jane's attention immediately. "Papa," Emma cried, running ahead. "Is that my surprise?" Isaac dismounted carefully, keeping the bundle secure. "Hello, Princess," he greeted Emma, bending to kiss the top of her head. "Yes, this is part of the surprise. Your brother decided he wanted to come meet you at school today." Jane reached them, her heart swelling at the sight of Isaac holding their 3-month-old son, James Thomas Reeves, named for both his grandfathers. "He's supposed to be napping," she said, accepting the baby and peering at his face. "He was very insistent," Isaac replied with a grin, leaning in to kiss her softly. "Like his mother." "What's the other part of the surprise, Papa?" Emma asked, tugging at his coat. Isaac's eyes twinkled. "Well, I happened to ride by the Wilsons' place this morning and Mrs. Wilson's dog had puppies 6 weeks ago. She said a certain young lady who gets excellent marks in school and helps her mama with the baby might be ready for a puppy of her own." Emma's shriek of delight startled baby James, who began to fuss. Jane soothed him automatically, smiling at her daughter's excitement. "Really, Papa, my own puppy, when can I see them? Can we go now, please?" The questions tumbled out in a rush. "That's where we're headed," Isaac confirmed, "if it's all right with your mother." Jane pretended to consider, though she had already discussed this gift with Isaac weeks ago. Emma had proven herself responsible beyond her years, especially since James's birth. "I suppose we could go see these puppies," she said finally. "But remember, a dog is a big responsibility." "I know, Mama," Emma assured her solemnly. "I'll take care of it every day, I promise." The ride to the Wilson farm took less than half an hour, with Emma chattering the entire way about names for her future puppy. Jane rode with James secured in a special sling Isaac had designed, the baby contentedly watching the passing scenery. The Wilsons' farm was the same one where Jane had hidden in the loft that fateful night almost 6 years ago. The old barn still stood, though it had been repaired and expanded since then. Jane always felt a strange mix of emotions when visiting: gratitude for the shelter it had provided, sadness for what had been lost, and joy for what had been found. Mrs. Wilson, now in her 60s but still spry, greeted them warmly. "Come see these pups before this one explodes with excitement," she laughed, leading Emma toward the barn where the puppies were kept. Isaac helped Jane dismount, carefully supporting her and James. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching her face for any signs of fatigue. He had been fiercely protective since James's difficult birth, which had left Jane weakened for weeks. "I'm fine," Jane assured him, touching his cheek affectionately. "Strong as a horse, doctor." Reynolds said at my checkup yesterday. Relief washed over Isaac's face. "Good, you had me worried for a while there." "I know," Jane acknowledged, "but I'm truly well now." She glanced toward the barn where Emma's delighted giggles could be heard. "Shall we go see which puppy is coming home with us?" Inside the barn, Emma was sitting in the straw, surrounded by 5 wriggling puppies, black and white border collies with bright eyes and endless energy. One puppy in particular, smaller than the others with a distinctive white star on its chest, seemed particularly attached to Emma, climbing repeatedly into her lap despite being gently deposited back with its siblings. "I think this one has chosen you," Mrs. Wilson observed with a smile. "Can I have him, Mama, please?" Emma looked up at Jane with hopeful eyes. "I'll call him Star because of his mark." Jane exchanged a glance with Isaac, who nodded. "Yes, you may have him," she agreed, "but remember your promise to care for him properly." "I will." Emma vowed, hugging the puppy gently. "He'll be the best dog on the Lucky R." After Patch, of course, Isaac reminded her with a wink. The old farm dog was now elderly and mostly retired from active duty but still held a special place in their hearts. "After Patch," Emma agreed solemnly. As they prepared to leave, Puppy securely settled in a basket attached to Emma's saddle, Jane found herself looking up at the hayloft where she had hidden with a newborn Emma so many years ago. Isaac, noticing her gaze, came to stand beside her. "Thinking about that night?" he asked softly. Jane nodded. "How different everything was then, how afraid I was." She looked down at James, sleeping peacefully in her arms, then at Emma, who was carefully checking that Star was comfortable in his basket. "I never imagined this life was waiting for me." Isaac slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her close to his side. "When I climbed up that ladder and saw you there, so fierce with that little knife, protecting Emma with everything you had, I knew you were something special, Jane Mitchell." "Jane Reeves," she corrected him with a smile. "For 5 wonderful years now. The best 5 years of my life," Isaac said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "With many more to come." They rode home together as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rolling Wyoming landscape. The Lucky R awaited them in the distance, the ranch that had become a true home to Jane, a safe haven where love had flourished, and a family had been built from the ashes of tragedy. As they approached the ranch house, Jane thought of all they had overcome and all they had created together. From that desperate night in the loft to this moment of contentment, the journey had been one of courage and hope and love. A cowboy had climbed up and promised safety, and that promise had blossomed into a life fuller and richer than she could have ever imagined. "Race you to the house." Emma called, urging her pony forward, careful not to jostle the puppy's basket. Isaac laughed, keeping pace beside Jane and James. "She gets that competitive spirit from you, you know, from both of us," Jane corrected with a smile, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." Together, they rode toward home. Toward the future, they continued to build day by day a future founded on a promise made and kept, on love that had grown from the most unexpected beginning, and on the courage to believe that even in the darkest moments, light and hope would find a way.